Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this very topical webinar on the Log4j vulnerability. I am Kelly Sinicola, Executive Vice President of several of our professional services areas here at Forelli. One of those being security, cloud, and infrastructure. So very important part of this constantly changing vulnerability and the constantly changing security status that we're facing. A couple welcome and reminder notes. Please ask questions during the presentation in the chat window. There is time dedicated at the end of the presentation for questions where you can come off mute and ask the questions directly. But if we are able to get to your question during the presentation, we will. Please also keep your microphones on mute. That'll just make sure there's no background noise. We are recording this presentation, so another reason to try and keep the background noise down to a minimum, and we'll be sending out a link to the recording following the webinar for your reference. Feel free to take notes, but know that you will have access to this recording as soon as that gets sent out to you. I do want to take a minute and introduce our presenters today. We have Armando D'Onorio, who is our internal CISO, as well as one of our senior security consultants here at Forelli. We also have Chris Mallory, Director of Security, Cloud, and Infrastructure Practice here at Forelli as well. And Andrew Russell, who is one of the directors in our colleague practice over the core team. And we're first going to start off by doing a poll. So you'll see that up on your screen shortly. And the question is, has your organization implemented any Log4j mitigations or workarounds to date? So I'm going to give everyone a few moments to answer this poll, and then you'll be able to see the results. And you'll notice that we did ask any mitigation so far because this is a ever-changing topic ever since it came out on Friday. Okay, so as you can see, about 85% of you on the call have implemented some mitigations, 7% have not yet, and 7% don't know, which is definitely a fair answer to that question. I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and he's going to start talking about the timeline for this vulnerability.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. So the Log4j vulnerability was first reported to the Apache Foundation on November 24th. Now, the first that many of us heard about this was last week, December 6th, when a patch was released. Now, a few days later, we started seeing a large increase in the attacks being reported on, being seen by organizations. But to take a step back, in retrospect, some of the large providers, such as Cloudflare, have noted that the first sign of the use of this vulnerability was as far back as December 1st. Now, that may change. As they are able to review more history, more logs and things of that nature, they might find that was an earlier date, but that's what we know today. This is an ever-changing situation. Now, the first patch was released December 6th, 2.15, but later another patch was released because there were some shortcomings in the quick release of 2.15. 2.16 is what is available today. I'm sure that will be outdated information very soon.
Talking a little bit about history, how far back does this actually go? A talk at Black Hat back in 2016 actually theorized about the possible exploit, and no attack code was ever released at that time, but now we've actually seen the bulk of these types of attacks started back here and just recently on December 9th. There's some additional links just if you're curious about knowing more about the background history there at the bottom of the slide. So looking at what we know now, discovered during an actual bug bounty engagement against Minecraft servers. The vulnerability is found to be way more impactful than some might actually expect. It has a near ubiquitous type presence in almost all major Java-based enterprise applications and servers, and it's used in many of these information technology systems. an active exploit is happening now, as we all know, and a lot of ransomware and crypto miners are definitely being utilized. It has impacted over 3 billion systems globally, and that number keeps rising.
So what is Log4j? What is this vulnerability? What does this exploit do? Essentially, the vulnerability allows for a remote attacker to take and add a simple string. It doesn't take a lot of knowledge to do this. There are proof of concepts and how-tos out online. You don't need a lot of skill set to do it. You add a little bit of extra text that basically tells the server that is logging. So most web applications write logs, and that's what they do from a security and compliance perspective, a performance perspective. And this vulnerability allows a person to add a little extra string that compels the web server to go reach out to wherever the attacker wants it to. And a lot of times that is going to be a malicious server that has a malware, a ransomware payload. So that is how it is gaining control. And unfortunately, you don't need any access. It's all of these web applications are typically designed to be external facing, and so that's why this is such a big deal. With Apache and Java and Log4j being in many places, this is it's a big deal. All right, there's the slide. So what do we do about this? Options. The options for prevention. One of the core tenets of cybersecurity is defense in depth. So if you're already using a web application firewall, just make sure that it's deployed the Log4j logic. So it's looking for this specific vulnerability and blocking those exploit attempts on this vulnerability. One of the things that we can do in higher education, we don't like to block outbound traffic. If you're an IT person and you have outbound firewall rules already in place, good for you. You're ahead of many of your peers. It's just one of those things that is not super common in higher education. But blocking out unnecessary outbound communication from your campuses, including things like LDAP, RMI, et cetera, that is a very good way of preventing the completion of that exploit. If the exploit is used, the attacker tells the web server to go look at this malicious LDAP server out in the world, but that server is unable to communicate, it's unable to reach out because the firewall doesn't allow it to, then that exploit is not successful. So anywhere that we can interrupt the exploit in its cycle, there are many steps for a successful exploit. Anywhere we can interrupt it is ideal. We can review our logs for indicators of compromise. You can check your firewall logs or your intrusion detection systems for those. Ideally, you want to upgrade to Log4j to the latest version. Right now, that's 2.16. That might change. 2.16, like we mentioned earlier, was released because there were some initial shortcomings in the first patch. If patching isn't possible, then we should isolate those machines, and you should also try to disable the GNDI lookups, disable Log4j altogether, and disable remote code bases. Those are all options that you can do within that job stack. All right, so the top 10 things, we made a top 10 list of things that you will need to do. So we want to make sure that you as an organization have the appropriate resources allocated. Now, this is people resources in terms of the proper skill sets to be able to look at this, and to make sure that those folks have time. So if you have other less essential projects that you had on the books, please do your teams a favor and set those to the side if at all possible, and allow them to focus on this. It is a pretty big deal. We'll want to make sure that you verify the inventory of your systems and determine whether they're vulnerable. So if you have a great inventory right now, that's awesome. You're one step down the road in the right direction. If you don't, it's time to make sure that you have all of your devices in inventory, and then you need to go step by step and determine whether they're vulnerable, whether that's signing into each one of them and checking what software is installed, or running a vulnerability scanner, something of that nature. Those are all things that need to happen. Apply the security patches for the internet-facing systems immediately. But don't forget about those internal systems. The external facing ones are your highest risk. And so it makes sense to take care of those with limited people resources and time. Take care of those right away, but once you get those done, don't stop the process. Make sure you get the internal ones as well. They're a little bit lower risk, but they are still, they're going to be still exploitable. Number 5 is, we talked about this in an earlier slide, block outgoing connections on the firewall. That will help disrupt that attack cycle. Armando, do you want to take it from here?
Certainly, thanks, Chris. As Chris already mentioned before, if this isn't possible, you want to monitor and alert on outgoing connections by using some intrusion detection systems, even as an example like Snort or Suricata. You want to conduct and review risk assessment findings, and then ensure triage and prioritization is done based on the risk to the business critical processes that you have. Ensure a response plan is approved for release in appropriate parties. And at the same time, you're going to need to expect and review daily status reports, especially since this interaction is so fluid. We had mentioned indicators of compromise before, but it's very important to take a look at checking for exploitation attempts. If they're successful or not, it doesn't matter. The web server logs, you can take a look at seeing if there's actually someone trying to get into your environment. Looking at perimeter logs, for the presence of lists of indicators of compromise. There are, it's about a list of 25 IP addresses that are current right now with botnets and payload delivery servers and basically the rogue LDAP servers that are serving up a lot of this stuff. So going through and reviewing that, and if you put in systems that can actually combat and help you from that perspective, you'll be in a better space.
Thanks, Armando. We have another poll for you guys. Do you have an up-to-date device inventory? An up-to-date device inventory is what we're wondering. Go ahead and respond now. All right, let's see what those results are. So it looks like 56% of you say yes, we have an up-to-date device inventory. 26% say no, and 19% say I don't know. And you know, I'd say that that's probably an accurate representation of a lot of different industries. It is one of the most basic items to a cybersecurity framework, or one of those initial steps to being able to know what you have and what to protect. But a lot of organizations struggle with it. It is difficult and it is time consuming and it's tedious sometimes. But knowing what you have is imperative to be able to know what there is to protect. I like to say, if there's a stack of $1 million in your kitchen, wouldn't you like to know that you have $1 million in your kitchen, and you might want to protect that? You might want to make sure you lock the doors, or install a little bit better bolt or something like that. You got to know what you have in order to be able to protect it. You can't protect things you're unaware of. So in today's day and age, that's even more complicated than it used to be, say, 10 years ago, because now we have a mix of on-premise, so on-campus servers, servers that reside in the cloud, whether that's an AWS or an Azure, or other private cloud areas, co-locations with other schools or other partners, network devices, workstations, and laptops. Laptops especially, where are those even at right now? Are they even powered on? Those are tricky, and a litany of other devices such as Internet of Things, building automation, control devices, things of that nature. All of those are items that are difficult to inventory. But something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet is better than nothing, and that makes sure that you understand what you have, so that you can then make decisions on that. All right, and then The next inventory that I like to talk about is your third-party vendor inventory. Now, it seems weird to inventory your vendors, but essentially what you want to do is you want to make sure you understand whose products are in your technology stack. So as you might have noticed this last week here, we're spending a lot of time looking on vendor websites. Is my vendor affected by this? Is the product by this vendor affected? All right, I have VMware, but 27 products are affected and 36 products aren't affected. That's the kind of information that you're going to need. So you're going to need to know whose software, who made the software, what product it is, what version, and where those all are in your infrastructure. And so having that list of vendors and products available to you, and keeping that up to date in the good times will help you tremendously in the bad times.
All right, we have another poll up. Do you have an up-to-date inventory of your third-party vendors? Please take the time to answer that question. All right, let's take a look at the numbers here. 38% say yes, 31% say no, and 31% say that I don't know. This is a good representation of what's out there, what we've seen prior, knowing that it's very important, as we're indicating now, knowing what services are being provided and what services are vulnerable, since those services represent your institution, especially when it comes to a compromise. So it's very important to make sure that your vendors know that they are protecting their clients and yourself.
So I'm here to talk about the Illusion impact and what we've been seeing on the core team. So specifically what we've been seeing currently across the Tomcat logs and the self-service logs that we have access to is that there's a lot of traffic out there testing out for vulnerabilities. The majority of those seem to be coming from security vendors, but there is documented attacks going on outside of higher ed. We so far have not seen a higher ed attack or heard of a higher ed attack. Our biggest concern right now is Ethos Identity 510. If you have that on your network, the workaround that Illusion provided needs to be put in place. If it's not been put in place by now, there's a pretty good chance that it's been hit, and there's probably a crypto miner running on it. So if you have Ethos Identity 510 installed, I'd highly suggest looking to see, you're looking at the task manager or looking at top, depending on if it's a Linux or a Windows box, and seeing if you see any odd activity there before you try and go put this workaround in. A lot of our clients are running Ethos Identity version 5.7 or 5. We even ran into one that was 5.1. Those versions are not vulnerable to this bug. They are vulnerable to other bugs because it's using Log4j version 1, which has some very serious vulnerabilities. So you're safe from this particular bug, but you do want to get up to Ethos Identity 5 or for the Banner folks, EIS 510, and then put the workaround in, because that's running anything older than 510, you got other risks with Log4j. As far as the colleague side goes, Log4j v2 was added to the listeners in September, which with the DMI update listed here on the screen. We've done a lot of internal research to see if we can use the common attacks that are available on the web on the listeners in our training environment. We have yet to be successful in that. And the reason for that is the listeners do not respond to HTTP requests. They only respond to RMI requests. And so specific code would need to be written to take advantage of the DMI listeners in their state. They are definitely vulnerable because they are running a bad version of Log4j. But as far as what we're seeing, it's not going to be included in the web attacks that are going on right now. So as far as partners go, the TouchNet and CollegeNet have reported back to clients that they have mitigated the issue and that they did not see any known breaches. We also got a very similar letter from ACI and Point and Pay. Broadcom, Chrome River, and Five9, we have not heard statuses on those. So if you have, please update the chat via chat here, or feel free to speak in our questions and answers section. We're looking forward to hearing more about how those vendors are working through this. So the last thing I'll say about the Illusion environment is that it came out late yesterday and really made the rounds early this morning that the workaround that Illusion gave is not 100% effective in blocking this this vulnerability. And we reached out to our Illusion partners for comment. They said they are currently analyzing to see if they are vulnerable, because there are basically the reason why basically the short of it is you have to have very specific use cases for that to not be appropriate, meaning that they had to have certain code in the listeners to make it vulnerable, even though the workaround was put in place. And so they're currently reviewing the code to see if they are vulnerable after the workaround's been put in place or not. So as we get more word about that, we'll definitely pass that along. Illusion's updating regularly. In fact, they have just updated it about 30 minutes ago. They have a hub article on the Illusion Hub that you can go and read with their current statements. They've split out every product into its own document as well. So if you need to specifically track one thing, you'll be able to do that easily. And of course, as our clients, we're going to reach out to you whenever we have issues.
Andrew, would you mind repeating which partners from that slide have and have not mitigated? It's a question from the chat.
Sure. CollegeNet and TouchNet, we've heard from. They've mitigated. They say they're good. We have not heard from Broadcom, Chrome River, or Five9.
Thank you.
And last thing is this is one of the more strange situations that, as far as security goes, in a long time. This is going to change every hour or every 2 hours. So as we see important things, we'll be passing that along for our core clients. We'll be passing that through your point of contact. If you're not a core client, we have our what's happening page, and we'll show that later. Back to the fellows.
All right. Now we'll talk a little bit about response and reacting to the situations that are occurring, a model response plan. What will be needed to help the defenses and business processes to run smoothly. One of the big things that sometimes causes roadblocks, or since this is more time sensitive, a streamlined resource requisition process should be allocated to information technology and security to address these ever-changing situations that are coming upon us. You also need to think about special change control windows for downtime to be able to apply patches or remediations, especially since they're so fluid at the moment, knowing that some patches and things may need to be repatched again as they find that there's still vulnerabilities happening. And then proactively activate your incident response team. Get them ready to start having some of these discussions and thinking about what they need to prepare and how to react in such a situation. So getting a response plan ready to be ready to be succinct in your communications to your clients, regulators, vendors, employees and even the press if the situation comes to the forefront. And then you want to prevent a repeat. Make sure to go through and have an incident response plan where you have documentation and procedures. You could dramatically lower your impact by having these things ready, making sure to update your plan to incorporate new processes and procedures, lessons learned, and all of that will help fix the situation and should be reused and applied to help you with organizing and responding to patching if isolation is needed, system hardening, and then monitoring and reporting and how fast and how often that needs to happen.
Great, thanks, Armando. So learning lessons from this situation and applying them to future situations, that's what we're talking about here. That applies to everything that Armando just said. It also carries forward into a question that I have. It's not an official poll question, but just think back to this issue cropped up Thursday of last week. When is it that you learned about the seriousness of the situation? When did your IT team and organization start its response? If the answer is not Thursday, perhaps consider signing yourself up for some more alerts. US CERT is a government sponsored entity, and their job is to promote the cyber welfare of the United States, and so they have agreements and collaborations and resources that can help you stay abreast of all of these different situations. So if you sign up for alerts with them, they will let you know all the vulnerabilities, all of the risks that are at the forefront very quickly. Usually within a half a day, they have an advisory or an alert out about anything that's happening, and it's usually very well written and very informative with links to references and resources. As colleges and universities, your staff may also qualify for membership into InfraGard. It's a resource where you can get somewhat classified information from FBI resources. InfraGard's goal is to secure the nation's infrastructure, and colleges and universities do qualify as infrastructure components to some degree, and a lot of times that information you may get a little bit of insider information on that as well that is not necessarily publicly released just yet. And as we found out this week, even more importantly than anything else, understanding, we talked about making sure we have an inventory of our third-party vendors, but let's get signed up for those third-party vendor security advisories too. Almost every single one of them will have a spot on their webpage that says, alert me when there's a security advisory. And again, you get a handy email in your inbox. So on a day like Thursday, you should have gotten one from CISA and 10 other vendors within a few hours saying, hey, there's a thing here. We don't have all the answers yet, but we know it's a thing, and we'll get back to you. And you'll stay in the loop, specifically around the products and technologies that you have on your campus. Now, the second set of items that I wanted to talk about is to encourage you to adopt a cybersecurity control framework. So the reason for that is it allows you to have access to standards, guidelines, and best practices to manage the risk to your institution. Now, risk sounds a little bit more. You hear risk in financial discussions a lot of times, financial risk and things of that nature, and that's on purpose. These cybersecurity control frameworks and standards, they are oftentimes a requirement of your college's financial audit process. And so you very well may already be familiar with NIST 853, ISO 27001. There are a handful of other cybersecurity control frameworks that are just really handy in guiding you along and basically stating what's best practice. And very few people achieve true certification in these, but it's the journey. And the understanding that if you're not making changes and you're not improving your security posture, you're actually moving backwards as things change, right? So trying to incorporate one of these into your operational work and your cybersecurity work will help your organization stay safe.
We've been asked before what type of tools should we use to help identify the vulnerability. So we wanted to just give some examples for you all to take a look at. There are a couple open source tools that are available by Anchor. They can scan and many package type dependency formats and ID their existence and report on the vulnerabilities. They're basically two different steps that are services that run through that, gripe and sift. So one will generate a software bill of materials so that you can help you also with inventory. And then the vulnerability scanner that goes through and tries to identify if the systems are all vulnerable or not. There are also a lot of cloud-based tools as well as on-prem tools that you can purchase. Some of the examples are there, pentesttools.com, and then Tenable and Rapid7.
If I can just add to that, Armando, real quick, these companies have plugins ready to go, ready to test this exact vulnerability. So you don't have to learn how to do and decipher the 1,000 vulnerabilities that you might have otherwise. You can just look for this one and be focused on remediating this one as well. And then when you have the opportunity, you might be able to use those tools and go back and further help protect yourself.
All right, our favorite part of the day.
So now feel free to come off mute if you have a question, or also you can use the chat window in Zoom to ask any questions that you have for the team.
I have a question. I'm Natasha DeCoco. Did Ellucian Ethos come back with what their status is?
Ethos. So there's two different ethoses, just to be clear. There's an Ethos integration, which is the product that ships data to the data lakes. That has been, Ellucian has stated from the very beginning that product is not vulnerable. And then there's Ethos Identity, which is a rebrand of the open source WSO2 product that Ellucian pushes for single sign-on capabilities. And so that one is vulnerable if you're on 5.10, which is the newest version that was released in 2020. So that's the current status of those. And there's a workaround for the 5.10.
And nothing about Ethos Analytics, that portion of it.
They did take Ethos Analytics offline.
Yep.
I noticed that earlier in the week, and I don't have an update on that. I apologize.
That's fine.
We can get back to you on that one.
Yeah, we're still down. We've been down since yesterday, 3 p.m. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Sure.
So I spoke, I'm from Guilford College. I spoke on Monday with our account rep, and he said that they were taking, now this is Ellucian Analytics.
That's correct.
Yes.
Not Ethos Analytics, but Ellucian Analytics, that they were taking it down because they had not heard from some of the integrated service providers what they were doing. Specifically, I know he mentioned Tableau, and I think there was one other provider at that point that was a question. I might have a note about the other provider. I can look back and see.
I remember about the Tableau.
Yeah, I believe they're still waiting on Tableau.
Thank you.
So just another quick question on Ethos Identity. You mentioned 5.7. If you're at 5.7, you need to go to 5.10 and then do the workaround, or? So
for Log4j, for the Log4 shell vulnerability that's being publicized right now, that seems to have a lot of traffic on it. If you're on 5.7, you're not vulnerable to that particular attack, but you are vulnerable to a lot more less publicized but same severity bugs. There are several CVE 9.8s based off of Log4j version 1, which is what anything prior to 5.10 runs on. we'd be happy to help you with that if you need help.
Thank you very much.
As far as
Question.
the
Oh, go ahead.
sorry, as far as the ethos integration for the on-prem components, I don't see any mention, positive or negative in regards to the messaging adapter or the Rabbit that is installed on our on-prem server. So can we assume that those are safe?
They came out and said that they were not vulnerable
Okay.
in their initial list that came out on Saturday.
Gotcha. Thanks.
A question from the chat. Are there any additional steps that should be taken for colleague DMI listeners other than the Ellucian recommended mitigation steps at this time?
Not at this time. We are awaiting Ellucian answers on whether or not there will be further workarounds. I would expect long-term a DMI update to be released that will deploy a new version of the jar file that they deployed in September, but I've not been given a timeline on that yet. We also were asked this morning about replacing that jar file with the new version that doesn't have this vulnerability in it. So basically taking the jar file that's 2.12 that's already in the listeners and replacing it with 2.12.2, which is a mitigation step. And as of right now, I would not recommend that just because we do not know what the impacts are, but it is something that we're trying to get an answer on to see what their thoughts on it are. And it just comes down to, it really depends on how they coded this in the Java layer. If they coded this in the Java layer to use those features, you can create some severe instability issues with a colleague. If they didn't use that stuff, there's no harm in it at all. But it's really dependent on what the code base looks like. And we can certainly decompile their code, but they have the best version of it.
Okay, another question from the chat. So this will be some quiz bowl, Chris and Armando. Does Rapid7 have to be installed on the possible affected server, or can it scan across our network and identify the vulnerability on all servers through a scan?
So there's two ways to look at vulnerability scans. You can look at it from a perspective of external to your organization or internal to your organization. And a lot of times what you could start to do first is do an external vulnerability scan, since that's your highest risk area, right? So you don't need any special local installations. It acts as the the safe trusted partner who's playing the attacker role to tell you where you're vulnerable. If you wanted to, as a next step, as we talked about, don't forget about those internal pieces as well. But if you want to do an internal vulnerability scan, most of those products require that there is a sensor installed within your infrastructure, and that's typically an agent or a client on a utility server, a utility virtual server, or sometimes they're a little lightweight virtual appliance you could deploy to your virtual infrastructure, and that just allows it a perspective of inside.
Awesome, that answers that question. Thank you, Chris. I do like to point out that this situation is very fluid. And so I know there are changes being made to the PowerPoint up until the point of the webinar taking place. So we are going to be offering further webinars as this develops. So make sure you keep an eye out for our emails or to Frelly.com on the What's Happening page to see when those change. We'll also be updating the blog post that we have out there right now. So for the questions you don't even know you need to ask yet, right? Those will get answered there. Okay, any other questions?
Okay, so if you have questions you don't want to ask in front of everybody else, we'll be sticking around until the last person leaves. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to stick around and talk to us after the session's over. This is just a reminder here at the end of the session. We help schools recover from ransomware all the time. And Frelly this last year has made a pledge to donate 100 hours of complimentary service to any school that gets hit with a cyber attack. So if you ever get hit with ransomware or have an intrusion on your system that impacts services, please don't hesitate to give us a call. I can guarantee you I can save you a lot of time recovering colleague. I can stand up, my team can stand up colleague faster than just about anybody on the planet. So if you have a need, don't hesitate to reach out to us, and there's no strings attached. We are trying to help out schools that are in need with this. We've given away at least 10 of these this year. So if there's anything y'all need regarding cyber attacks, just let us know. And for any updates we have on this, including additional webinars, which I imagine we will have, please check our Forelli.com/what's happening page. We will probably have a blog update in the next few days, and then we'll probably have a webinar next week after we get some more guidance from Aleutian. So thank you so much.
Thank you for joining.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.